it is time for our Tech 24 segment, and for that, I'm joined by Peter O'Brien, like every week. Hello there.
Hi, Charlie.
So we're going to come back here to France. The pension reform and the anger over that wasn't the only controversy here in Parliament this week. So tell us more about what else went down that has people upset.
So this has slipped under the radar a little bit in the international press, but it was a big change in terms of surveillance law in France that got passed in French Parliament this week, even though not many MPs actually turned up to vote in the end on this bill. But yesterday, a bill was passed which essentially means that algorithmic video surveillance, so that's AI-empowered use of cameras to survey crowds and events, sports events, that's now been provided a legal framework in France and has essentially been legalized. Now, this will allow official computers to recognize and signal risks and disturbances in public spaces, things that perhaps human observers wouldn't pick up on. It's part of a special package of laws for the Olympics and Paralympics next year, and as such this video surveillance part, well, it's slated to only be in effect until June 2025, but you will know that that's almost a year after the end of the Olympics. The idea is for the government to be able to keep millions of people who will flock to the French capital safe, but many privacy activists are obviously concerned that this might be a precursor to a new status quo of AI-enhanced surveillance.
Mm-hmm. So can you go into a little more detail about what exactly authorities could use this technology to do?
Yeah, so using existing surveillance systems, so notably the 4,000 surveillance cameras around abouts that are in Paris right now, these would essentially send footage to pieces of software, a system of software which can study the movements of people, movements of cars, the surfaces of buildings, and just space in general, and work out if there are any anomalies. It's not just these 4,000 cameras, by the way. Paris is planning to have a new fleet of drones also surveying crowds, and things like unusual crowd movements that could signal the start of a crush, for instance, or something like an abandoned bag that could potentially be a terror threat. These would then be signaled to police or other security services who'd then be able to deal with it. But it's not like this tech wasn't used already. Up until now, arguably until recent years, it was in a bit of a legal grey zone. And you do have already some towns in Paris, like Massy to the south of Paris, that already uses this kind of technology to detect, for instance, cars if they're going down the wrong street, and then allow, in this example, police to work out that these cars were all coming from the same company, and then go and speak to that company and tell them your employees are taking the wrong way down the street. So that's one example of how it's used already.
Mm-hmm. So all these examples that you've given, I mean, they sound like things that people would want, or things that would help keep people safe. No one wants to go to the Olympics and potentially have a dangerous item near them or get crushed in a crowd. So why are people upset about this?
Well, privacy activists see this as the sort of door opening to potential police overreach. That's really what they're worried about. And they're also worried about how it could be used to discriminate against certain groups. I have talked to technology companies developing this, who one of them told me that the demand is there for slightly more nefarious purposes for this technology. So they told me they had to turn down requests, for instance, to track caravans belonging to traveling communities, or track, for instance, homeless people. And some would argue that's, discriminatory. Last week, you had around 40 members of the European Parliament signing an open letter to French lawmakers saying that the plan creates a surveillance precedent never before seen in Europe. There's a digital rights group in France called the Quadrature du Net. They argue that these systems would technically be handling biometric data, even though the government strongly refutes this and hence open the floodgates to a new sort of techno-police state. I spoke to their spokesperson, Noemi Levar, who told me what her fears are.
Donc en fait, on donne à la police un pouvoir d'analyse et de contrôle.
We're giving the police immense powers of analysis and inspection over us and over our bodies. This law hides this under the pretense of experimentation, the Olympic Games and pseudo-safeguards, which won't mitigate the dangers of the technology. For us, it's the worst technological turning point of the last few years in France, and they've tried to make it silently.
Malheureusement, a été assez invisibilisé ces derniers mois en France.
Okay, so how is the government responding to concerns like this?
Well, one MP who's in favour of the bill, now that the tweaks have been made to it and it no longer has biometric data allowed, Philippe Letom, he said that he told me that video surveillance will only be used by companies that keep the data on national soil and respect French and European data regulation. There's also two examples that keep cropping up among people who defend the use of this technology. One is the 2016 Nice attack. They claim that could have been prevented with this technology, and the other is last year's Champions League final, which they say would not have been so chaotic had it been for this kind of crowd control. But of course, there has been, on this latter example at least, a UEFA commission study on it that showed that the problem was really police mismanagement. I mean, there's no evidence to suggest that the introduction of this technology would have prevented such a thing.
Peter O'Brien from our technology desk, thank you for bringing this story to our attention. Appreciate it.